Dr. Alina Vasquez never expected her xenobiology research assignment on station would change the course of galactic history. She was just another human scientist in a universe where humanity was still considered the newest, weakest member of the Galactic Confederation. Most species barely tolerated human presence in their territories, viewing them as primitive upstarts who had stumbled into space travel through sheer luck rather than evolutionary superiority. The station orbited a dying red dwarf, serving as a research outpost for studying the unique ecosystem that had evolved in the system's asteroid belt. Alina had volunteered for the isolated assignment because it offered her the chance to study life forms that existed nowhere else in known space. What she discovered would reshape everything the galaxy thought it knew about strength, leadership, and the true nature of power. Her first encounter came during what should have been routine sample collection in the asteroid field. Alina was suited up in her environmental gear, carefully extracting crystalline formations that housed microscopic organisms, when her sensors detected something massive moving through the debris field. The readings didn't match any known ship signatures or natural phenomena. As she worked, a shadow fell across her collection site. Alina looked up to see something that defied immediate classification. The creature was roughly the size of a small shuttle, with a serpentine body covered in scales that shifted between deep purple and silver. Multiple pairs of wing-like appendages kept it stable in the zero-gravity environment, and its elongated head featured both reptilian and avian characteristics. Most striking were its eyes, large, intelligent, and filled with what Alina could only describe as ancient sadness. The creature observed her for several minutes, its massive form utterly still except for the gentle movement of its wings maintaining position. Alina continued her work, speaking softly into her comm system to record her observations while being careful not to make any sudden movements. She had encountered enough hostile wildlife during her career to recognize when something was evaluating rather than hunting. When she finished collecting samples, Alina turned to face the creature directly. Following protocols for first contact with unknown species, she removed her helmet and bowed slightly, exposing herself to the minimal atmosphere trapped within the asteroid's weak gravity well. It was a gesture of trust and respect, one that most humans would have considered insanely dangerous. Creature's response was immediate and unexpected. It lowered its great head in what was unmistakably a return bow, then began to sing. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, a deep harmonic melody that seemed to resonate through Alina's bones even in the thin atmosphere. As the song continued, more shapes emerged from hiding places throughout the asteroid field. Dozens of similar creatures, ranging from the size of Alina's shuttle down to specimens no larger than her hand, all joining their voices to the chorus. When the song ended, the largest creature approached Alina slowly. It extended one wingtip toward her, and she instinctively reached out to touch it. The moment contact was made, Alina felt something she had never experienced before, a direct mind-to-mind connection that bypassed language entirely. Images and emotions flooded her consciousness. She saw the creature's history spanning millennia, their civilization built on harmony with the cosmic forces that shaped stellar evolution. They called themselves the Ethereal, and they had been the first species to achieve interstellar travel, long before any of the current Confederation members had even developed writing systems. But the Ethereal were dying. Their reproductive cycle was tied to specific stellar conditions that no longer existed in this part of the galaxy. For 3,000 years, they had been slowly fatting away, watching younger species rise to prominence while their own kind diminished. They had retreated to this dying system not out of choice, but because it was the only place left where they could survive at all. Through the mental link, Alina felt their desperation, their grief for lost worlds and extinct family groups. But she also sensed something else, a flicker of hope that had begun the moment they observed her working among the asteroids. There was something about her approach, her careful respect for the environment and the life within it, that resonated with their deepest cultural values. The connection lasted only minutes in real time, but Alina experienced what felt like hours of shared memory and emotion. When it ended, she found herself changed in ways she couldn't immediately understand. The largest ethereal remained close, its massive head tilted in what she somehow knew was an expression of curiosity and evaluation. Alina's training kicked in, and she began the delicate process of establishing formal communication. She activated her universal translator and began speaking slowly and clearly, introducing herself and explaining her presence in the system. The ethereal listened, their wing movements creating subtle patterns that she gradually realized was their own form of gestural language. The largest creature, who Alina learned was called something roughly equivalent to Star Singer, responded through a combination of vocalizations and wing movements that the translator struggled to interpret. The basic meaning came through clearly enough. They had been observing her for weeks, watching how she interacted with their environment and the smaller life forms that shared their space. What had impressed them was not her technology or her species' reputation, but the care she took to minimize her impact on the delicate ecosystem. Every sample she collected was taken with consideration for the organisms that depended on those environments. She had even modified her equipment to reduce electromagnetic interference that might disrupt the ethereal's natural bioelectric fields. Starsinger explained that most species who had discovered their refuge over the centuries had either ignored them entirely or attempted to study them like specimens. Some had even tried to capture them for research or exploitation. Alina was the first to approach their territory with genuine respect and to treat their ecosystem as something worth preserving rather than simply exploiting. As their conversation continued, Alina learned that the ethereal possessed knowledge and abilities that the rest of the galaxy had only dreamed of. Their understanding of stellar mechanics, energy manipulation, and biological adaptation was so advanced that their casual observations could revolutionize entire scientific fields. But they had shared this knowledge with no one, having learned through bitter experience that most species would use such information for conquest or personal gain. The revelation that shook Alina most deeply was Starsinger's final statement of their first meeting. "We have waited 3,000 years for one who leads not through force, but through understanding. You move through our space as we do, with purpose but without dominance, with strength but without cruelty. Perhaps the Queen of Legend has finally come." Alina tried to explain that she was just a scientist, not a leader or ruler of any kind. But Starsinger's response was a gentle laugh that somehow conveyed both amusement and profound wisdom. "Leadership is not a title, young one. It is a way of being that others recognize and choose to follow. We have seen your true nature, and we name it correctly." As Alina prepared to return to the station, Starsinger made an offer that would change everything. The ethereal wanted to share their knowledge with someone worthy of it, someone who would use it wisely and protect rather than exploit. They invited Alina to return, not as a researcher studying subjects, but as an honored guest learning from teachers. The flight back to station gave Alina time to process what had happened. Her scientific mind tried to rationalize the encounter, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just experienced something that transcended normal first contact protocols. The ethereal's reaction to her presence suggested they saw something in her that she didn't recognize in herself. When she arrived at the station, Alina faced a dilemma. Standard protocols required her to report the discovery of a new sapient species immediately, but something about the ethereal's vulnerability and their trust in her made her hesitate. They had survived by remaining hidden, and exposing them to the broader galactic community might doom them to exploitation or worse. Alina decided to submit a preliminary report noting unusual life signs in the asteroid field while requesting extended time for observation and analysis. It was technically within her authority as the lead researcher, but she knew it would only buy her a limited amount of time before higher authorities demanded more detailed information. That night, as she reviewed the data from her encounter, Alina noticed something that made her heart race. The bioreadings from her environmental suit showed massive spikes in electromagnetic activity during her mental connection with Starsinger. But the energy patterns weren't random. They formed complex, repeating structures that suggested some kind of information transfer had occurred at the quantum level. Alina had always been sensitive to electromagnetic fields, a trait that had made her invaluable for studying certain types of alien biology. But the readings suggested her sensitivity was far more developed than anyone, including herself, had ever realized. The ethereal's mental communication hadn't just been received by her consciousness, it had been facilitated by her unique neural structure. As she prepared for sleep, Alina found her dreams filled with Starsinger's voice and the haunting melodies of the ethereal chorus. But mixed with those sounds was something new, the voices of other species, crying out across space in languages she had never heard but somehow understood. They were calling for help, for protection, for someone to stand between them and forces that threatened to destroy everything they held dear. Alina woke with the absolute certainty that her life as a simple researcher was over. The ethereal had seen something in her that she was only beginning to understand herself. Whatever lay ahead, she knew there was no turning back from the path Star Singer had shown her. The next morning brought news that would accelerate everything. A Confederation patrol had detected unusual energy signatures in the system and was en route to investigate. Alina had perhaps days before her secret would be exposed, before the ethereal's sanctuary would be violated by those who saw them only as subjects to be studied or resources to be exploited. She made her choice without hesitation. Alina loaded her shuttle with supplies and headed back to the asteroid field, not as Dr. Alina Vasquez, the xenobiologist, but as someone beginning to understand that some responsibilities transcend career, species, or personal safety. The ethereal had waited 3,000 years for their queen. Perhaps it was time to discover what that truly meant. Alina's return to the asteroid field was met with a reception that took her breath away. Hundreds of ethereal had gathered, their forms creating a living constellation against the backdrop of dying stars. They sang as she approached, their harmonies creating standing wave patterns that made her shuttle's hull resonate like a musical instrument. But this wasn't the mournful song she had heard before. This was a celebration, a welcome that spoke of hope renewed. Starsinger guided her to a massive asteroid that had been hollowed out and transformed into something beyond Alina's imagination. The interior was a vast cathedral of living crystal, where bioluminescent organisms created patterns that shifted and flowed like frozen music. The ethereal had built their refuge not by conquering nature, but by partnering with it, creating spaces that enhanced and protected the life forms they shared the cosmos with. As Alina marveled at the beauty around her, Starsinger began what could only be described as an education unlike anything in human experience. The ethereal didn't just teach through words or demonstrations. They shared knowledge through direct transfer of understanding, allowing Alina to grasp concepts that would have taken years of conventional study to master. She learned that the ethereal's apparent mastery of stellar mechanics wasn't just scientific knowledge. It was an intuitive understanding born from their symbiotic relationship with cosmic forces. They could feel the electromagnetic signatures of different stellar types across impossible distances, could sense the health of star systems by the patterns of energy they emitted. This ability had made them natural explorers and protectors, watching over younger civilizations and occasionally intervening to prevent cosmic disasters. But their greatest gift to Alina wasn't technical knowledge. It was the revelation of her own capabilities. The mental connection that had seemed so remarkable during their first encounter was only the beginning. Under Starsinger's guidance, Alina discovered that her sensitivity to electromagnetic fields was actually a form of quantum consciousness interface that existed in perhaps 1 in 10 million humans. The training was intense and often overwhelming. Alina learned to perceive the bioelectric signatures of living beings across vast distances, to sense the emotional states and basic intentions of different species through their unique energy patterns. More remarkably, she found she could project her own consciousness across space, communicating with distant beings without any technological assistance. During one particularly deep session, Alina's expanded awareness detected something that filled her with alarm. The approaching Confederation patrol wasn't just investigating energy anomalies. They were responding to intelligence that suggested valuable resources might be hidden in the system. Worse, the force included ships from the hegemony, an aggressive alliance of species that saw expansion and resource extraction as their fundamental right. Starsinger confirmed Alina's worst fears. The hegemony had been systematically eliminating or enslaving species they deemed inefficient in their use of galactic resources. The ethereal's knowledge and unique abilities would make them incredibly valuable as either servants or subjects for experimentation. Their peaceful nature and declining numbers made them easy targets. Alina felt a rage building inside her unlike anything she had ever experienced. These beings who had waited millennia for someone to understand them, who had preserved knowledge and wisdom that could benefit the entire galaxy, were about to be destroyed or enslaved by beings who saw them only as resources to be exploited. It was then that Starsinger revealed the final piece of Alina's education. The ethereal weren't just teachers. They were guardians of a vast network of species throughout the galaxy. For thousands of years, they had been secretly protecting worlds and civilizations that couldn't defend themselves against aggressive expansion. They called it the Silent Kingdom, a realm not of territory but of protection, where the vulnerable could find sanctuary and the peaceful could develop without fear. The Silent Kingdom included species that the broader galactic community had never even heard of, beings so gentle and non-aggressive that they had never developed military technology, civilizations that had achieved incredible advances in art, philosophy, and biological sciences, but remained helpless against those who chose conquest over cooperation. Alina's mind reeled as she understood the implications. The ethereal weren't just endangered themselves. They were the protectors of hundreds of other species who would be left defenseless if they were destroyed. The approaching hegemony forces wouldn't just be claiming one system. They would be breaking a network of protection that had kept entire civilizations safe for millennia. But Starsinger's next revelation shook Alina even more profoundly. The ethereal's role as protectors was ending whether they were destroyed or not. Their declining numbers and failing health meant they could no longer maintain the energy expenditure required to shield so many worlds. They had been preparing for years to pass their responsibility to someone else, someone who could take their accumulated knowledge and find new ways to protect the vulnerable. Alina protested that she was just one human, that she had no authority or power to protect anyone. Starsinger's response was to show her something that changed her understanding of power itself. Through their shared consciousness link, Alina experienced what it felt like to be a member of a species that had lived in constant fear until the ethereal's protection arrived. She felt the relief of beings who had hidden in caves for generations, finally able to live openly because they knew someone watched over them. She experienced the gratitude of species who had been able to develop their art and philosophy because they didn't need to devote all their resources to military defense. She sensed the love and reverence that thousands of worlds felt for protectors they had never seen, but whose presence they felt in every peaceful day. The understanding hit Alina like a physical blow. Power wasn't about commanding others or possessing superior technology. True power was about standing between those who would harm and those who needed protection. It was about using strength to create safety for those who couldn't create it themselves. As this revelation settled into her consciousness, Alina felt something fundamental shift within her. The anger she had felt at the approaching threat transformed into something harder and more focused. She wasn't just Dr. Alina Vasquez anymore. She was becoming something the galaxy desperately needed but had never seen before. A human who understood that true leadership meant service, that real strength meant protection rather than conquest. The hegemony fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, while Alina was still processing her transformation. Their communications were exactly what she had expected: demands for immediate surrender of any valuable resources, threats against primitive species, who failed to recognize superior authority and barely concealed excitement at discovering what they assumed would be easy prey. Alina's response shocked everyone, including herself. Using her newly developed abilities, she projected her consciousness across space to make direct contact with the hegemony fleet commander, bypassing all their technological defenses and speaking directly into his mind. Her message was simple, delivered with a quiet certainty that somehow made it more terrifying than any threat. "You are not welcome here. Leave now and no harm will come to you." The hegemony commander, a brutal Varkarian named General Thex, responded with the typical arrogance of his species. He demanded to know what primitive species dared to threaten a hegemony force, promising swift and devastating retaliation for such insolence. His fleet began advancing toward the inner system, weapons charging for what they expected to be a quick demonstration of superior firepower. Alina's second message was different. Instead of words, she shared an experience. She let the hegemony forces feel what she had learned to perceive. They suddenly found themselves experiencing the electromagnetic signatures of every living being in the system, from the massive ethereal down to the smallest microorganisms. They felt the interconnected web of life that made the asteroid field a thriving ecosystem rather than dead rock. More importantly, they felt Alina herself, not as a weak human scientist, but as someone who had touched the deepest currents of cosmic energy and learned to move within them. The presence they encountered was vast, patient, and utterly implacable. It wasn't threatening violence. It was simply making clear that violence would not be permitted. General Thex made the mistake that aggressive species always made when encountering something they couldn't understand or intimidate. He ordered his fleet to open fire on the asteroid field, assuming that superior weapons would quickly resolve whatever primitive resistance they faced. The result was unlike anything in recorded military history. Alina didn't destroy the incoming weapons or disable the hegemony ships. Instead, She redirected their own energy systems, turning their weapons against each other while simultaneously broadcasting their attack to every inhabited world within 50 light-years. The hegemony forces found themselves helpless, their ship systems completely controlled by someone who understood technology not through engineering, but through direct manipulation of the electromagnetic forces that made it possible. But Alina's true demonstration of power came next. Instead of destroying the helpless hegemony fleet, she did something that shocked them more than any display of superior weapons could have. She repaired the damage their misdirected weapons had caused to their own ships, ensuring that no one had been seriously injured in the brief confrontation. The message was clear. Alina possessed the power to destroy them completely, but chose instead to protect even those who had come to harm others. It was a demonstration of strength so absolute and mercy so profound that it broke something fundamental in the hegemony's worldview. General Thex, his voice shaking with an emotion he couldn't name, made a second demand to know who Alina was and by what authority she acted. Alina's response would be remembered across the galaxy for generations to come. "I am Alina of Earth, and I act by the only authority that matters, the duty to protect those who cannot protect themselves. You have seen what happens to those who threaten the innocent under my watch. Choose your next actions wisely." The hegemony fleet retreated without firing another shot. But Alina knew they would return, and they would bring others with them. Word of what had happened would spread throughout the galaxy, and every aggressive species would want to test themselves against this new power. As she watched the enemy ships disappear into hyperspace, Alina felt Starsinger's presence beside her. The ancient ethereal's voice carried notes of wonder and deep satisfaction. "And so the Queen reveals herself at last. The Silent Kingdom has found its new guardian, and the galaxy will learn what it means to face one who rules through protection rather than conquest." Alina turned to look at the vast network of ethereal gathered around them, their songs now filled with harmonies of hope and renewal. She was no longer a scientist studying alien life. She was becoming something the universe had never seen before. A human who understood that true monarchy wasn't about ruling over others, but about standing guard over those who needed someone to watch the darkness for them. News of the hegemony fleet's retreat spread across the galaxy faster than Alina had anticipated. Within weeks, her actions at Kepler 442 had become legend, though the stories varied wildly depending on who was telling them. Some species spoke of a terrifying new human weapon that could control minds across space. Others whispered about a mysterious protector who appeared from nowhere to defend the defenseless. The truth, Alina discovered, was often less important than what different species needed the story to be. The first to seek her out were not the powerful or the curious, but the desperate. They came in small ships, often barely functional, carrying refugees and representatives from worlds that had been marked for hegemony expansion. The pattern was always the same. They would approach the asteroid field cautiously, broadcasting simple messages asking for the protection of the human queen they had heard about in whispered stories. Alina's first instinct was to correct their assumptions about her title and authority. But Starsinger, with the wisdom of millennia, helped her understand that symbols were sometimes more important than facts. These beings didn't need Alina Vasquez, the xenobiologist. They needed the Queen of the Silent Kingdom, someone whose very existence meant that the powerful could no longer prey upon the weak with impunity. Each group that arrived brought new challenges and new understanding. The Whispers were a species that communicated primarily through electromagnetic fields, making them nearly invisible to most galactic civilizations, but perfectly suited to Alina's expanded consciousness. They had been living as refugees on the edges of space, their homeworld strip-mined by corporations that never realized a sapient species existed there. Through her connection with the Whispers, Alina learned to perceive entire civilizations that had been overlooked by the major galactic powers. Species that lived in gas-giant atmospheres, beings that existed primarily as electromagnetic patterns in stellar coronas, and civilizations that had evolved in the quantum foam between dimensions. All of them had been suffering in silence, either ignored or actively persecuted by those who couldn't perceive their existence. The Crystalline Collective presented a different challenge. They were silicon-based beings who had achieved consciousness through resonant frequencies in their mineral matrices. Their homeworld was being systematically harvested for rare crystals, with the harvesters never realizing they were committing genocide on a planetary scale. Alina's intervention required her to develop new forms of communication based on harmonic resonance. learning to speak in frequencies that could carry meaning across their crystalline networks. With each new group that sought her protection, Alina's abilities grew stronger and more sophisticated. She learned to project her consciousness not just across space, but across different dimensional frequencies, allowing her to communicate with beings that existed partially outside normal space-time. Her sensitivity to electromagnetic fields evolved into something approaching omniscience within her growing sphere of influence. But it was her encounter with the nursery species that truly transformed Alina's understanding of her role. The nursery species were ancient beyond measure, beings whose life cycle involved caring for the young of other species across vast stretches of space and time. They had been secretly protecting and nurturing thousands of developing civilizations, ensuring that younger species had the time and safety needed to evolve complex societies. The nursery species were dying out, their numbers reduced to a handful of individuals scattered across the galaxy. But before they passed into extinction, they had been searching for someone who could understand and continue their work. Alina's demonstration of power combined with mercy had convinced them they had found their successor. Through her mental connection with the eldest of the nursery species, a being whose true name was unpronounceable, but who allowed Alina to call her caretaker, Alina experienced the full scope of what galactic protection actually meant. It wasn't just about stopping wars or preventing exploitation. It was about understanding the complex web of relationships that allowed civilizations to develop naturally. Caretaker showed Alina star systems where aggressive species had been gently diverted from expansion paths that would have destroyed developing worlds. She experienced the delicate interventions that had allowed hundreds of species to achieve spaceflight without being conquered by their more militaristic neighbors. Most remarkably, she felt the vast network of subtle influences that ensured young civilizations developed ethics and wisdom alongside technology. The responsibility was overwhelming. Alina realized she wasn't just becoming the protector of a few refugee species. She was being asked to become the guardian of galactic evolution itself, ensuring that the universe continued to produce wisdom and beauty rather than just power and conquest. The test of her resolve came sooner than expected. The hegemony returned with a massive fleet, but they weren't alone. They had convinced 3 other aggressive species confederations to join them in destroying what they called the human aberration before her influence could spread further. The combined force included over 200 warships, representing the largest military collaboration in recorded galactic history. Alina felt their approach long before they entered the system, their collective bioelectric signatures burning like a dark star against her expanded consciousness. But this time, she wasn't facing the threat alone. The refugee species that had sought her protection had been quietly organizing themselves, not to fight, but to serve as extensions of Alina's awareness and will. The Whispers could relay information instantaneously across vast distances through their electromagnetic communication. The crystalline collective could store and process enormous amounts of data in their linked consciousness matrices. The ethereal provided the wisdom of ages and the ability to manipulate cosmic forces on a stellar scale. Together, they formed something the galaxy had never seen before, a network of cooperation that transcended species boundaries and traditional limitations. When the combined fleet arrived, they found something impossible. The Kepler 442 system had been transformed into a fortress, but not in any way their military minds could comprehend. Instead of weapons, platforms, and defensive shields, they encountered a living system where every asteroid, every particle of cosmic dust, every electromagnetic field had been organized into a single, vast, conscious entity. Alina no longer needed to project her consciousness across space. She had become the space itself within her sphere of influence. Every ship in the attacking fleet found itself surrounded by awareness that knew their exact position, understood their weapons systems better than their own engineers, and could predict their actions before they made them. The fleet commander, a collective intelligence from the Hive Confederation called Supreme Nexus, demanded that Alina face them in honorable combat, according to traditional galactic warfare protocols. Alina's response demonstrated how completely she had transcended such thinking. Instead of engaging in battle, she began broadcasting the personal histories of every being in the attacking fleet. Each soldier, each officer, each support technician suddenly found their life story being shared across the entire fleet communication network. But these weren't just facts and dates. Alina shared their deepest memories, their fears, their loves, their moments of doubt about the aggressive expansion their species demanded of them. She showed them to each other not as faceless warriors serving abstract causes, but as individuals with hopes and dreams that were remarkably similar across species boundaries. The psychological effect was devastating to military morale. When beings saw their enemies not as threats to be destroyed, but as individuals struggling with the same fundamental questions about meaning and purpose, the entire foundation of aggressive warfare began to collapse. Ship after ship began broadcasting requests for communication rather than military orders. Supreme Nexus, recognizing that traditional warfare was useless against an opponent who could turn your own forces against you through empathy rather than force, made a decision that would reshape galactic politics forever. Instead of retreating or escalating, the Hive Confederation formally requested an audience with Alina to discuss the establishment of new protocols for interspecies relations. Alina agreed, but on her own terms. The meeting would take place in the asteroid cathedral the Ethereal had created, and representatives from all the refugee species would be present as equal participants. More importantly, the discussion would be conducted through shared consciousness rather than traditional diplomacy, ensuring that no one could hide their true intentions or motivations. The resulting negotiation was unlike anything in galactic history. Instead of trading threats and concessions, the participants found themselves exploring the fundamental assumptions that drove their civilization's behavior. Alina served not as a judge or ruler, but as a facilitator who helped each species understand how their actions affected others and how their own needs might be met without causing harm. The breakthrough came when Alina shared her own transformation, how her understanding of strength and leadership had evolved from seeing herself as a scientist studying subjects to recognizing herself as a guardian protecting family. She helped the assembled beings understand that true security came not from dominating others, but from creating conditions where everyone could thrive. Supreme Nexus, speaking for the Hive Confederation, made an unprecedented proposal. Instead of expanding through conquest, they would redirect their collective intelligence towards solving the resource distribution problems that drove most interspecies conflicts. The hegemony species would use their military efficiency to protect trade routes and refugee movements rather than expanding territory. Other confederations would contribute their unique abilities to building what Alina began calling the Galactic Sanctuary, a zone of space where development and cooperation replaced conquest and exploitation. The proposal required Alina to formalize her role as something the galaxy could understand and accept. She could no longer remain Dr. Alina Vasquez, researcher from Earth. The beings who had placed their trust in her protection needed her to become the queen of the Silent Kingdom in name as well as function. Alina's acceptance of the crown was not a ceremony of power, but a commitment to service. Starsinger and Caretaker together created a symbol of her authority that was unlike any royal regalia in galactic history, a living crystal that existed partially in normal space and partially in the quantum realm, allowing her consciousness to remain connected to all the beings under her protection regardless of distance or dimensional barriers. As Alina felt the weight of true responsibility settle upon her consciousness, she realized that her transformation was complete. She was no longer just a human who had learned to communicate with alien species. She had become something entirely new. A being who existed at the intersection of all consciousness, whose strength came not from her ability to dominate others, but from her willingness to carry the burden of their protection. The galaxy would never be the same. For the first time in recorded history, the powerful had voluntarily submitted to the authority of someone whose only claim to rule was her demonstrated willingness to place the needs of others above her own. The age of conquest was ending, and the age of sanctuary had begun. The establishment of the Galactic Sanctuary created ripple effects that reached the furthest corners of known space. Within months, species that had been isolated for centuries began emerging from hiding, drawn by stories of a protector who valued wisdom over strength and cooperation over conquest. Alina found herself at the center of a transformation that was reshaping not just political structures, but the fundamental assumptions about how intelligent species could relate to each other. The first major test of the new order came from an unexpected source. The Architect Collective, an ancient species that had remained neutral in galactic affairs for millennia, sent a delegation to evaluate what they called the human experiment. The architects were beings of pure thought who had transcended physical form eons ago, existing as patterns of consciousness that could manipulate matter and energy through focused will alone. Elena's meeting with the architect delegation took place in a space between dimensions, a realm where thought and reality intersected in ways that defied physical laws. The lead architect, a being whose presence felt like standing in a library containing all possible knowledge, subjected Elena to what could only be described as a test of fundamental character. Through shared consciousness, the architects showed Elena potential futures where her sanctuary failed, scenarios where her protection became oppression, where her mercy was exploited by the truly malevolent, where her human limitations led to catastrophic decisions affecting trillions of beings. They forced her to experience the full weight of every possible failure, every way her good intentions could lead to galactic suffering. The test was designed to break anyone whose commitment to protection was based on ego or desire for power. But Elena's response surprised even beings who had observed the rise and fall of thousands of civilizations. Instead of defending her choices or trying to justify her authority, she acknowledged every potential failure and asked for help in preventing them. Elena's humility in the face of cosmic responsibility convinced the architects that something unprecedented was occurring. For the first time in their existence, they encountered a being who had accepted ultimate power not because they believed themselves perfect, but because they understood the cost of allowing that power to remain in the hands of those who would abuse it. The architect's decision to formally recognize Elena's authority sent shockwaves through galactic civilization. Their endorsement carried weight that transcended military or economic power. It represented the approval of beings whose wisdom spanned geological ages. Species that had been watching the sanctuary's development from a distance suddenly began requesting membership or protection. But Elena's greatest challenge came from within her own species. Earth's government, upon learning of her transformation from respected scientist to galactic queen, demanded her immediate return for debriefing and reassignment. They viewed her actions as unauthorized diplomacy that had created dangerous complications for humanity's carefully negotiated place in galactic society. The human delegation that arrived was led by Admiral Sarah Chen, Elena's former mentor and the woman who had first recommended her for xenobiology research. Chen's mission was to convince Elena to step down voluntarily and allow Earth's diplomatic corps to manage the complex relationships she had created. The reunion between Elena and her former mentor was painful for both women. Chen saw Elena's transformation as a betrayal of human values and scientific objectivity. She argued that no individual had the right to commit their entire species to the enormous responsibilities Elena had assumed, regardless of how noble their intentions might be. Elena's response revealed how completely her perspective had changed. She explained that she no longer thought of herself as representing humanity or any single species. The beings under her protection didn't follow her because she was human. They followed her because she had demonstrated a commitment to their welfare that transcended species loyalty. The conversation that followed challenged both women's fundamental assumptions about duty, authority, and the nature of leadership itself. Chen argued from the perspective of democratic accountability, that power must be granted by those it affected and could be withdrawn when it was no longer wanted. Elena countered that some responsibilities transcended democratic processes, that when beings were threatened with extinction or enslavement, waiting for political consensus could mean the difference between life and death. The philosophical debate was interrupted by an emergency that demonstrated Elena's point with brutal clarity. A distress signal reached the system from a species called the Memories, beings who existed as living repositories of their civilization's entire history and culture. They were facing extinction not from war or natural disaster, but from a particularly insidious form of cultural genocide. The Harvest Corporation, a multi-species commercial entity, had developed technology that could extract and commodify memories, experiences, and cultural knowledge. They had begun systematically harvesting the memories, not to destroy them physically, but to steal everything that made their civilization unique and sell it as entertainment experiences to wealthy consumers across the galaxy. Elena's response was immediate and absolute. She projected her consciousness across hundreds of light years, manifesting directly within the Harvest Corporation's command ship. Her appearance, no longer quite human but recognizable as the Queen of the Silent Kingdom, terrified the corporate executives who had assumed their actions were too distant and small-scale to attract attention. What followed was Alina's most direct demonstration, yet of what justice meant in her new reality. Instead of destroying the corporation or punishing its leaders, she did something far more effective. She gave them the full experience of being harvested themselves. Every executive, every technician, every investor who had profited from the memory's suffering found themselves experiencing what it felt like to have their most precious thoughts and experiences stolen and sold. They felt the violation of having their deepest memories turned into commercial products, the horror of watching their cultural identity being packaged as entertainment for beings who could never understand its true meaning. The effect was immediate and permanent. The Harvest Corporation didn't just cease their operations. They liquidated their assets and dedicated their resources to returning the stolen memories to their original owners. More importantly, word of Alina's intervention spread throughout the commercial networks, effectively ending the market for such cultural products galaxy-wide. Admiral Chen, who had witnessed the entire intervention through Alina's shared consciousness, found her arguments about democratic accountability suddenly seeming less relevant. When beings faced this level of systematic exploitation, waiting for formal political processes to develop responses was tantamount to complicity in their destruction. The breakthrough in their relationship came when Chen asked Alina a direct question. What happens to the sanctuary when you're gone? Even humans don't live forever, and you've made yourself indispensable to trillions of beings. Have you created a system that can only survive as long as you do? Alina's answer revealed the depth of her planning and the wisdom she had gained from her ancient advisors. The sanctuary wasn't built around her personally, but around the principles she embodied. She was training successors from dozens of species, beings who shared her commitment to protection over dominance, but brought their own unique perspectives and abilities to the role. More importantly, Alina was establishing what she called the web of understanding, a network of consciousness that connected beings across species boundaries and allowed them to share perspectives and experiences directly. As more species joined the web, the need for a single central authority would diminish, replaced by a collective wisdom that could respond to threats and injustices with unprecedented speed and effectiveness. Chen's final question cut to the heart of both women's concerns about Alina's transformation. Do you ever regret leaving your old life behind? Do you miss being just Alina Vasquez, human scientist? Alina's response was quiet but filled with absolute certainty. I miss the simplicity sometimes, but I can never regret becoming someone who can stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. Every being who sleeps safely because they know someone is watching over them makes every sacrifice worth it. The conversation convinced Chen that Alina's authority, while unprecedented, was based on something more solid than personal ambition or species loyalty. She had become the leader the galaxy needed not because she sought power, but because she had proven willing to carry its burden regardless of personal cost. Admiral Chen's recommendation to Earth's government was revolutionary. Humanity should formally recognize Alina's sovereignty over the Galactic Sanctuary and offer Earth's resources to support her mission. The decision would make humanity the first species to voluntarily subordinate their expansion ambitions to the greater good of galactic civilization. As Chen prepared to leave Kepler 442, she witnessed something that crystallized her understanding of what Alina had become. A group of juvenile ethereal, beings no larger than house cats, approached Alina without fear or ceremony. They climbed onto her shoulders and began singing, not the complex harmonies their elders used for formal communication, but simple melodies that expressed pure affection and trust. Alina's response to the young ethereal was gentle and natural, as if caring for alien children was the most normal thing in the universe. She sang back to them in their own harmonic language, her human voice somehow able to produce the complex frequencies that created meaning in their perception. Watching this interaction, Chen finally understood what the smallest whispers meant when they called Alina their queen. It wasn't about political authority or military power. It was about being someone who could be trusted absolutely to put their welfare above everything else, including her own life and happiness. Alina had become something the galaxy had never seen before, a ruler whose authority came not from the consent of the governed, but from their absolute trust in her willingness to sacrifice everything for their protection. It was a form of leadership that transcended politics and entered the realm of the sacred. As Chen's ship departed the system, she carried with her a message that would reshape humanity's relationship with the broader galaxy. Alina of Earth had become Alina of the stars, and her transformation marked the beginning of a new age where power served wisdom rather than demanding submission to strength. The galaxy was learning what it meant to be governed by love rather than fear, and the example was spreading faster than any military conquest ever could. 5 years after Alina's transformation began, the Galactic Sanctuary had grown beyond all projections. What started as a refuge for a few endangered species had become a new model for interstellar civilization, encompassing over 3,000 star systems and involving representatives from more than 800 different species. The success had attracted attention from the deepest reaches of space, attention that would test everything Alina had built. The challenge came from the Void Seekers, ancient beings who existed in the spaces between galaxies and viewed the development of complex civilizations as a form of cosmic contamination that needed to be cleansed. They had been dormant for millions of years, but the unprecedented level of cooperative consciousness that Alina had fostered was apparently significant enough to wake them from their long slumber. Alina first became aware of their approach through disturbances in the quantum foam that connected her consciousness network. The Void Seekers didn't travel through normal space. They moved through dimensional layers that existed beneath reality itself, emerging directly into target areas with forces that could unmake entire solar systems. The threat they represented was unlike anything the galaxy had faced before. The Void Seekers weren't interested in conquest or resource extraction. They wanted to return the universe to its primordial state of maximum entropy, viewing order and cooperation as aberrations that needed to be corrected. They had ended entire galactic civilizations in the past, leaving behind nothing but dead space and scattered atoms. Alina's response to this ultimate threat revealed how completely she had transcended her original human limitations. Instead of gathering fleets or preparing defenses, she began the most ambitious consciousness expansion in the history of sapient life. Using the web of understanding as a foundation, Alina linked her awareness with every being in the sanctuary, creating a collective intelligence that spanned thousands of worlds. The process was excruciating. Alina's consciousness became a conduit for the combined thoughts, fears, hopes, and love of trillions of beings. She experienced every birth, every death, every moment of joy and sorrow simultaneously. The weight of so much shared experience should have shattered any individual mind, but Alina's transformation had prepared her for precisely this burden. When the Void Seekers emerged in the heart of sanctuary space, they expected to find scattered civilizations paralyzed by fear and easily swept away by their reality-unmaking abilities. Instead, they encountered Alina's expanded consciousness, a presence that filled entire star systems and responded to their attacks not with weapons or shields, but with something they had never experienced before: unconditional love for existence itself. The Void Seekers' power came from their ability to convince matter and energy that non-existence was preferable to the struggle of maintaining complex organization. They whispered entropy into the quantum foundations of reality, making atoms forget how to bond, making energy forget how to maintain patterns, making consciousness forget why existence was worth the effort. Alina countered their assault with something far more powerful than any technological defense. Through her connection with every being in the sanctuary, she shared the full experience of what existence meant to those who treasured it. She showed the Void Seekers what it felt like to watch a sunrise through the eyes of a being seeing beauty for the first time, to experience the birth of a child through the consciousness of a parent, to feel the joy of discovery through the mind of a scientist unlocking the universe's secrets. The battle was fought not in space, but in the realm of fundamental meaning. The Void Seekers attacked with the cold logic of entropy and the seductive peace of non-existence. Alina defended with the chaotic beauty of life and the passionate commitment to preserving everything worth protecting. For the first time in their existence, the Void Seekers encountered a consciousness that understood their perspective, but chose differently. Alina didn't deny the ultimate truth of entropy or the difficulty of maintaining order against cosmic decay. Instead, she demonstrated that the temporary nature of existence made it more precious, not less worthwhile. The turning point came when Alina did something unprecedented. She offered the Void Seekers a place in her sanctuary, not as conquerors or destroyers, but as guardians of the balance between creation and entropy. She showed them how their power could be used not to end civilizations, but to prevent them from becoming so rigid and unchanging that they stopped growing and learning. The Void Seeker's response was silence that lasted for subjective eons. Through her expanded consciousness, Alina felt them struggling with concepts their species had never considered. The possibility that destruction and creation could work in partnership rather than opposition challenged the fundamental assumptions that had driven their existence for millions of years. When they finally responded, it was with a question that echoed across dimensional boundaries. Why do you fight so hard to preserve that which must eventually end? Why do you commit such effort to protecting what cosmic forces will inevitably destroy? Alina's answer became the foundation of what historians would later call the Eternal Compact. Because the meaning is not in the permanence, but in the choosing. Every moment a being chooses existence over non-existence, love over fear, creation over destruction. That choice has value regardless of how long it lasts. We fight not to make things permanent, but to make the time we have as meaningful as possible. The philosophical exchange that followed reshaped both Alina's understanding and the Void Seeker's purpose. They began to see the sanctuary not as cosmic contamination, but as an experiment in maximizing the meaning that could be extracted from temporary existence. Instead of ending the experiment, they chose to become its protectors, ensuring that it could continue until it reached its natural conclusion. The integration of the Void Seekers into the sanctuary created new possibilities that even Alina hadn't imagined. Their mastery of entropy allowed the development of technologies that could extend the lifespans of dying stars, giving entire civilizations additional millennia to develop and explore. Their understanding of dimensional boundaries enabled communication and travel between galaxy clusters, opening up possibilities for expansion and cooperation on truly cosmic scales. But perhaps most importantly, their presence solved the problem that had been haunting Alina since her transformation began, the question of succession and permanence. The Void Seeker's perspective on cosmic timescales meant they could serve as guardians of the sanctuary's principles long after any biological species had evolved beyond recognition or passed into extinction. Alina's role began to evolve again as the sanctuary matured into something that no longer required her constant attention and protection. The web of understanding had become self-sustaining, with member species taking responsibility for protecting and nurturing each other. The principles of cooperation over conquest had spread so thoroughly that aggressive expansion was becoming increasingly rare throughout the galaxy. The final scene of Alina's transformation took place in the same asteroid cathedral where she had first learned to perceive the ethereal's true nature. Star Singer, now ancient even by ethereal standards, had requested a private audience to discuss what he called the completion of the circle. Star Singer's message was both celebration and farewell. Alina's work as the active queen of the Silent Kingdom was approaching its end, not because she had failed, but because she had succeeded so completely that her direct intervention was no longer necessary. The galaxy had learned to protect itself through cooperation rather than domination, to solve conflicts through understanding rather than force. Alina's response to this news revealed how completely her perspective had evolved. Instead of feeling displaced or unnecessary, she experienced profound satisfaction at having created something that could survive and thrive without her constant presence. The greatest achievement of any protector was making protection unnecessary. But Star Singer had one final gift for Alina, the opportunity to return to her original human form and rejoin her species as a simple citizen, her memories of cosmic responsibility sealed away until they were needed again. The offer was genuine, and Alina considered it seriously. The decision was made for her by the arrival of a group she had never expected to see again, juvenile members of dozens of species she had protected over the years. They had grown up in the safety of the sanctuary, knowing they were protected, but never really understanding by whom or how. Now, as young adults, they had come to meet the being whose sacrifice had made their peaceful childhoods possible. Alina's interaction with these young beings revealed the true measure of her success. They didn't see her as a distant, powerful queen to be feared or worshipped. They saw her as family, as someone who had always been there for them even when they weren't aware of needing protection. When the smallest among them, a whisper child no bigger than Alina's thumb, asked if she would stay to help them build the galaxy they would inherit, Alina's choice became clear. She would remain as guardian, not because the sanctuary needed her to survive, but because these young beings deserved to know that someone would always be watching over them as they took their first steps into adult responsibility. Alina's final transformation was perhaps the most profound of all. She became something the universe had never seen before, an immortal protector whose power came not from dominance over others, but from their love for her and her absolute commitment to their welfare. She was a queen not because she ruled, but because she served. She was mighty not because she could destroy, but because she would never stop protecting. The smallest whisper's final words to Alina became the motto of the new galactic age. Our queen lives in human form, not to show us power, but to show us love. She is mighty not because she makes us obey, but because she makes us safe. Alina of Earth had become Alina of the stars, and in doing so, had shown the universe what true strength really meant. The galaxy would never again confuse power with worth, or might with right. The age of the Protector Queen had begun, and it would last as long as there were beings who needed someone to watch over them while they slept in peace. In the end, the creatures hadn't submitted to Alina's might, they had submitted to her love. And in that submission, they had found not slavery, but the freedom to become everything they were meant to be.